This evening I'll be speaking on the latest scientific evidences for the existence of the God of the Bible. This afternoon I'll be doing a seminar on the 9 most frequent objections we hear in our organization for the Christian faith. And this afternoon I've been asked to give the story of how I came to faith in Jesus Christ, particularly through my scientific studies. And if you don't want to listen to me, you'll find a one-page summary on the table there that you can take out with you. And if you have to rush away and can't ask the question that was on your heart about science and faith issues, there's cards there you can fill out, and we'll be happy to respond to your question either by mail or by phone. I was born and raised in Canada. I didn't meet Christians until I was 27 years of age. I think that would be an impossible situation in the United States. There's Christians everywhere in this country. But in Canada, there's only about 1/5 as many Christians per capita. More than that, the Christians in Canada tend to localize. I have since discovered towns and cities in Canada that are more than 65% evangelical Christians, but where I was born and raised, the percentage was below 1%. And so I went 27 years before I actually got to talk to a Christian. But I was raised in a little place called Vancouver, British Columbia. And the neighborhood was a place where immigrants from all over the world were settling, basically refugees. And my father could be classified as a Canadian refugee. He had a thriving business in Montreal that was collapsed by a cheating financial partner, and so he had to start life all over again, penniless, and he chose to do that in Vancouver, British Columbia. So the whole neighborhood where I was being raised was filled with refugees. But these refugees were extremely committed to making sure that their children got all the intellectual advantages of life. And so all the children in our neighborhood were people kind of like myself who chose to follow academic disciplines at age 7, 8, 9, or 10. My interest in astronomy started at age 7. It began one of those rainy nights when the clouds broke and you could actually see the stars. We rarely could, but on that rare night, I turned to my parents and said, "Mom, Dad, are the stars hot?" They told me, "Yes, son, the stars are very hot." I asked them why, and they said, "You have to go to the library," which I did. And I became very fascinated by the books there I saw on astronomy. And by the time I was 8, they gave me a card to the Vancouver main public library. And after I went through all the books on astronomy and physics there, they gave me a card to the university library. And that's kind of the way our whole neighborhood was. These kids, because it rained so much, we spent all of our time in libraries. And I chose astronomy. My friend down the street decided to become a mycologist. And we'd go to the library together. He would go to the mycology section. I'd go to the astronomy section. But it was the persistent study of astronomy that convinced me at a fairly early age that God must exist. By the time I was 15 and a half, I was looking at all these different models for the universe, and at that time there were many competing models, but it seemed a little obvious to me that one model was standing out from all the others, namely the Big Bang model. And I could recognize that this was the model that eventually was going to beat out the competition. And following the same logic of Albert Einstein, if the universe has a Big Bang beginning, that means it's exploding. If it's exploding, there indeed is a cosmic beginning. And if there's a cosmic beginning, there must be a cosmic beginner. And so from that time onward, I never doubted the existence of a creator God. But like Albert Einstein, I was highly skeptical of this God being personal enough that he would want to communicate with human beings. However, at the age of 17, I became challenged through some history teachers at our public school that I should at least take a look at the claims of these different religions. Part of our history course was to look at the different religions of the world. And so I thought for the sake of intellectual honesty, I should at least look at the different holy books that back up these different world religions and proved to my satisfaction that indeed that they are all humanly crafted frauds. And what they teach you in science is begin with the easy project first and save the most difficult to the last. And so I chose to start with the Hindu Vedas. And it didn't take a lot of reading to recognize that they were filled with scientific absurdities. Perhaps the most humorous ones were accounts I read of human civilizations on the surface of the sun. And I felt that the Hindus of 3,000 years ago weren't aware of how warm it is on the surface of the sun, or how little oxygen there is on the backside of the moon. That's another place they'd like to stick cities. But what concerned me was their concept that time was eternal and the universe went through infinite oscillations with a cycle of 4.32 billion years. And so recognizing that this was in contradiction even with the astrophysics of the 1960s, I said, that's sufficient for me. This is not of divine origin. It must be of a human origin. And the yardstick I was using was the record of nature reveals itself as being perfectly consistent and harmonious. There are no contradictions or errors in the record of nature. Everything fits together in a harmonious, elegant fashion. And so I felt that the same God that created the universe was communicating to us through a holy book. It would have to have those same characteristics of complete harmony, of elegance, and of freedom from contradiction and error. And so by looking for the opposite of that, lack of harmony and contradiction of error, that to me would be evidence that it was of merely human origin and not of divine origin. Now, the dominant religion in our neighborhood outside of atheism was Buddhism. I was raised close to Vancouver's Chinatown, and so I was very curious what the Buddhists had to say. And I discovered that they really don't have a holy book. They have all these commentaries. But their commentaries concerning the universe and the creation are borrowed carte blanche from Hinduism. It's the same message. And so I felt that Buddhism couldn't be it either. The next one I picked up was the Quran, the holy book of the Islamic faith. And when I began to go through the Quran, I spotted a common denominator. I said, isn't it interesting that all of these holy books are written in an esoteric style? Typically poetry of an extreme esoteric nature. And that bothered me because I felt that the God that created the universe wasn't so mysterious and so appealing to intellectual snobbery as I saw in these texts. Moreover, I was disturbed by the vague nature. What bothered me about the Quran was how many dozens of pages I had to read to find something specifically enough stated that it could be put to some kind of test. It kind of reminded me of fortune tellers who prophesy to you that you're going to cross water in the next month. There's so many different ways that can be interpreted you can't miss. But eventually, after spending quite some time, I found statements in the Quran that could be tested. Perhaps the most specific one with respect to science is the statement that the stars are closer to us than the planets. Now, from a context of 700 AD, you wouldn't know the difference. But today, of course, we recognize that the stars are far more distant than the planets. And actually, if they'd paid enough attention to the Greek writings, they would have recognized, even back then, that that was incorrect. So after finding a few dozen statements like that, and what I really found most frequently was placing historical events in the wrong geographical locations.